Good morning and welcome to the 29th meeting of the Health and Sport Committee in 2019. We have received apologies today from David Torrance and from Miles Briggs. I'm delighted to welcome Sandra White back to a meeting of the committee. Before we start the meeting, can I ask everyone please to ensure that mobile phones are off or on silent and ask people not please to record or film proceedings, as we will do that ourselves. The first item on our agenda this morning is the committee's consideration of a consent notification sent by the Scottish Government relating to the Food and Feed Hygiene and Safety Miscellaneous Amendments EU Exit No. 2 Regulations 2019. The purpose of this instrument is to ensure continuation of consumer protection elements of the current food and feed regulatory regime. Updates are proposed to the current body of EU food law dealing with these matters. The committee scrutinised this instrument earlier in the year, and we are now simply asked to consider the Scottish Government's decision to consent rather than to consider the specific terms of the proposed SI, which we have previously considered. Can I ask if the committee is content, if any members, first of all, have any comments or questions to raise? Emma Harper.
Yes, thanks, Convener. I am quite happy to proceed, and I know that the Minister, Joe Fitzpatrick, has written us a letter about this, but I do have continued concerns with how we manage food and feed safety going forward, especially if we're looking at my knowledge about the Food and Drug Administration's acceptable defects handbook of certain products that are in our food and feed that might be coming from other countries. So, but I'm content to proceed today with this.
Thank you very much. That's noted, and I'm no doubt we'll have the opportunity to discuss those wider issues in the new year when these matters next come before us. Otherwise, are there any comments? If not, is the committee content to make no recommendations? Do we agree to make no recommendations? That's agreed. Thank you very much. The second item on the agenda this morning is to take evidence as part of the committee's continuing programme of scrutiny of health boards. We have been hearing from representatives of boards around the country. Last week we were in Perth to hear from NHS Tayside, and this morning we are hearing from the State Hospitals Board for Scotland. So I'm delighted to welcome to the committee Terry Curry, Chairman, Gary Jenkins, Chief Executive Officer, Lindsay Thompson, Medical Director, Mark Richards, Director of Nursing and Performance Management Director, David Walker, Director of Security, Estates and Facilities, and Robin McNaught, the Finance and Performance Management Director. Welcome to the committee. And can I start by asking about leadership? Clearly that's one of the issues that has been important in our scrutiny of all boards, and not least here there are changes that have been made. And I would like to ask, perhaps start by asking the Chair of the Chief Executives about the new members of senior staff and what strengths those new members of staff have brought to the board. Terry Curry.
Thank you, Convener, and thanks to members of the committee for giving us the opportunity to come and speak to you about the work which we carry out at the State Hospital. In terms of leadership, I think we've been pretty fortunate over this past few years at the State Hospital to have a strong non-executive cohort with a range of skills. The one area over this past couple of years when we had to refill a vacancy that we were perhaps less strong in was in financial management, and when we recruited a new non-executive director, we ensured that we got someone with the requisite skills. But as I say, we have people from various different backgrounds with a total mix of skills, and they have contributed to the strength of the State Hospital Board. And I think the same is the case with the executive leadership. Gary, as Chief Executive, just joined the State Hospital in 2019, so the executive team has been in place for some time before that. We've had a number of changes over this past few years, but Lindsay, our Medical Director, has been there for a long, long time and is an important anchor because we take great pleasure in the quality of the patient care that we have at the State Hospital. And under Lindsay's leadership, I think that's well recognised both within and beyond Scotland. We recruited Robin a number of years ago as Finance and Performance Director, and he has added considerably to our performance in that regard. As you're aware, and you will have heard from previous submissions from health boards, looking after the finances of a health board is a pretty daunting prospect. We have managed to remain in balance for a long number of years, albeit in recent years it's been quite tight, although in the current calendar year I think we're making great progress. Mark joined us as nurse director from Glasgow about 3 years ago, and Mark again has added considerably to the experience of the management team. One of the things that we have been keen to do, and I've been particularly keen to do this, is to try and draw in people from outside the State Hospital. The State Hospital is a village, and many of the staff have been there for a long time, which on the one hand is very positive from an experience point of view. On the other hand, we constantly need fresh thinking and innovation, and bringing people in from the outside has proved to be a useful and helpful tactic for us. David is probably the most recent guy to join us. David's a year in post as Director of Security. David's background is in the police service. Unusually for a health board, and you'll not come across many directors of securities in other health boards, but you'll understand the need for one at the State Hospital. And David brings loads of experience. He has to pick up the health connection. He's done that very well over this past year. So I believe the leadership team at both executive and non-executive level is strong.
Thank you very much. Gary Jenkins.
Thank you very much. I would also like to comment in relation to leadership at a senior management level. So whilst we recognise within the executive cohort and the non-executive cohort the leadership strengths that the chairman has put across, as part of our initial review from the Sturrock recommendations and from our iMatters and from other staff surveys, we've been trying to look at a theme of developing leadership within the State Hospital at senior management level too, so that we start to empower and engage the organisation to have frontline leaders that are skilled and that are able to lead the workforce at an operational level. So that's a key focus for us as well, internally as well as at executive and non-executive level.
And can you indicate, in your view, and clearly you're a relatively new kid on the block, what coming in do you see as the challenges facing the State Hospital going forward?
We have a number of challenges, not just around leadership, but if you'd like me just to expand on some of the themes that we've been looking at. One clearly has been in relation to attendance management and support for staff. And we have seen very well in the recent 4 to 5 month period a significant improvement on attendance management through support for staff, through very tailored support for staff, and through a series of metrics that we have put in place for staff. Where I think we have to focus on now is ensuring that the measures that we have are meaningful for staff, and that we take the feedback from the teams and programme those into supportive measures for the organisation going forward. So, for example, if you take our highest reason for absence, it is stress, anxiety and mental illness. We have tailored programmes in conjunction with NHS Lanarkshire for staff members so that they can access counselling and support services and caseworkers. I think we need to evaluate that process to ensure it's working properly and to make sure that staff feel supported, engaged and valued within the workplace. So that's a key priority we need to look at. And the second theme is obviously the redesign of the clinical model, which again, through a staff survey and through an engagement process, the staff had highlighted a number of dissatisfaction measures associated with the way that the clinical model was being delivered following the transfer to the new hospital. So a key piece of work has been the development of the clinical model, staff engagement, staff empowerment within that model, and indeed we managed to talk to over half of the workforce in relation to their thoughts, feelings, views, around how we should implement and develop the clinical model going forward. So trying to create a more engaged culture with more empowered staff and leadership development at the right areas of the organisation.
Thank you very much, and we'll come back and talk about the clinical model, I'm sure, later in the morning.
Would it be helpful if I added a couple of more challenges just to
You
what
may,
Gary said?
you
Because
may.
I think,
Always a big full picture.
I think this will be helpful to the committee. Another major challenge is the obesity levels which we have with our patients. People with severe lifelong mental illness are likely to die 15 to 20 years prematurely because of physical ill health related issues. And we are aligned to the mental health strategy, which quite clearly states that there should be parity of esteem between physical and mental health. And we wish to realise the same for our patients. We introduced a healthy choices plan about 3 years ago. And virtually all of the actions in that plan have been enacted and implemented. But the fact of the matter is we've made little impact on obesity. We took a strong stance in eliminating smoking from the hospital, and I think we're going to have to be equally radical from here on in our approach to controlling obesity. Another area of challenge, which I've no doubt the committee will be familiar with, is in communications. The tabloids are always willing to publish headline-grabbing stories which often refer to particular patients and past events. These stories can be extremely damaging to our patients and their families, to victims and their families, and to our staff. Our response to this onslaught has been to adopt a defensive posture and attempt to manage the negative publicity. We now intend to adopt a much more proactive approach to communications. As I said, we're proud of our work and we intend to be much more forthcoming about some of the compelling issues around forensic mental health services. And finally, in challenges, the Sturrock report presented a clear warning of the need for stronger governance and greater transparency. We have examined that report in great detail and are now implementing our action plan. I believe it has given us the impetus to pay much closer attention to values and behaviours. We already had a number of ideas in the pipeline, for example, establishing excellence awards to recognise staff, and we are determined to promote a much stronger culture of recognition and appreciation. I think one of the key lessons for the Sturrock report for us was all health boards naturally and rightly are focused on targets, but sometimes that has been to the detriment of other key aspects of organisation which contribute to performance, and values and behaviours fall into that category, and that's something that we intend to ramp up in terms of our work.
Okay, that's very interesting and very comprehensive list of key challenges. We'll, I think, have questions on a number of these in turn. Can I start with Brian Whittle?
Thank you, Convener. Good morning to the panel. Thank you for coming in. Mr. Jenkins, you have already raised the issue of quite a high sickness absentee rate. And I think in 2015-16 it rose from just under 6% to just over 8%, and that has kind of persisted since then. I wonder if you could maybe let us know if you think it's been a problem since 2015-16, and why is that rate so persistently high now?
The rate actually in the last, if I focus initially on the last 6 months and then perhaps talk about the other components that you've mentioned, excuse me, the State Hospital has had the highest level of sickness absence across the NHS boards, with historically high figures. I think the highest was 10.93% in 1 month. In the last 6 month period, as I've indicated, through a number of measures which were to stop and examine why absence was so high, to look at the factors associated with absence, to understand from the safety review report if assaults and ridders were on the increase, and to look at measures that could be put in place to support staff who were subject to assaults and other challenges in the workplace. In the past 6-month period, we have managed to achieve an absence level that ranges from 5.13% across to 6.10% just now. So we've seen a significant improvement in absence and attendance in the last 6-month period. The contribution that NHS Lanarkshire has made, so we've been collaborating, as I mentioned earlier, with NHS Lanarkshire in relation to how we manage absence, because as a small board, we need to look to collaborate with wider partners in relation to how we take some of these issues forward. So a number of measures have been introduced that were not in place before. So for example, there's a service that we have called Easy, which is Easy Access for You. And if a member of staff phones in and is absent on the first day of absence, that member of staff is able to access for mental health issues a support worker that day to phone and seek support. We have looked at strengthening policies and to try and understand reasons behind absence so that we can put in place an action plan to tackle it. We have looked at compliance with our policy in terms of return to work and in terms of staff value to see if there are any additional measures that we can put in place to see a sustained improvement in our absence patterns. As I say, I'm pleased to report that in the past 6-month period that I've been involved in the State Hospital, we've seen a sustained reduction in absence levels. But there has undoubtedly been challenges in the previous 4-year period relating to higher than average levels of attendance management. When, in my previous role, when I had a medium secure service, I had looked to see if the figure, the 4-5% figure, was applicable in relation to forensic mental health services in the Scottish Prison Service. And I did uncover that obviously there's a higher absence rate amongst other forensic mental health services and the Scottish Prison Service when compared to NHS acute organisations. So looking at that, one might, the figure for NHS Scotland is 4%, our target is 5%. We are within a percentage of achieving that now. But as I've highlighted, we need to continually improve our support mechanisms to make sure that staff see them as support mechanisms and not as management or disciplinary actions to support people coming back into the workplace. So having that appropriate infrastructure there, I believe, is helping reduce and sustain our absence levels at a far more acceptable compliance level.
Thank you. In our examination of many boards across Scotland, one of the key elements that keeps coming up is a cultural issue, and has been mentioned in the Sturrock report of a culture of bullying. Seems to be, I think the word I would use would be endemic across the whole board. Has that been, or is that an issue currently with yourselves, and how would you address that?
Sure. So as the Chairman has already mentioned, we looked at a number of factors which we presented to staff. So I think a key component is to understand how the workforce feel. So from initially the 2018 safety review, when we were asking staff in relation to the clinical service model, the delivery of service model, a lot of feedback that we got was not related to the clinical service delivery model. It was in relation to how staff felt, whether staff felt empowered, whether staff felt they could contribute to the organisation, if we had structures and mechanisms in place that would support staff and that we listened to staff. Overlaying those themes from 2018 with the outcome of the staff survey and then the Sturrock themes, we identified 40 themes from Sturrock. Through the Partnership Forum, we discussed where did Partnership feel that the themes in Sturrock applied to the State Hospital. We shortlisted 40 and surveyed all staff to try to get back where staff felt we could improve on our cultures, values and behaviours, and where staff could feel more engaged to come and work with us on a programme that developed that journey for us. We have analysed the outcome of that result, and we, throughout January to April, as part of the clinical model redesign, have dedicated a specific work stream that looks at leadership, values, behaviours and culture. I personally am going to lead that work stream, which will take all wards and departments to look at key metrics and key measures that we can further introduce to make sure that staff are engaged, they don't feel intimidated, they don't feel harassed, they have the appropriate support mechanisms, and that they feel that they are engaged with the employer, and that we work as a collective organisation to try to support staff and to try to make sure that staff have the ability to develop and discuss problems or challenges that they may face in relation to their workplace.
Just a very brief supplementary. I mean, relating to that, of course, is the term whistleblowing. Have you looked at, and do you have a mechanism in place where you feel that staff feel empowered to and are safe to complain if they need to, or raise an issue if they need to?
Certainly, we do. We have one whistleblowing case at present that just come up in the last fortnight. Our current non-exec, who's the whistleblowing champion, is unfortunately in long-term absence. So for impartiality, we've actually gone out with our board to seek another non-executive to oversee that case. Like all boards, however, we are involved in the current process for a dedicated non-executive for whistleblowing, and we will promote again through our values, cultures and behaviours process how staff, if they feel they want to highlight an issue through whistleblowing, can do that. So we do have a whistleblowing process, we do have a whistleblowing policy, and just now there is one whistleblowing case.
Good morning, everyone. I wanted to continue the theme in regarding the workforce. And I noted, Mr Curry, when you mentioned that the state hospital is like a village, but many of the staff have been there for a long time, and I'll come on to that about the retirement age. It's quite a huge issue in regard to retirement age as well. And you also said you try and bring in staff from outside, you know, basically maybe the health service or other areas as well. And Mr Jenkins, you just explained about what you're putting into, you know, basically retain staff, I presume. And I just wonder if support for staff and that type of thing and development does retain staff. So the question I wanted to ask is, how do you attract staff to the state hospital, and how do you retain the staff once you have actually attracted them to that?
I think a key part of that is staff development. We have got a very strong staff development programme that people have the opportunity to see the prospect of working their way through the ranks, and the level of uptake of our training, which I believe to be a really high calibre, is remarkable. So I think that's the biggest single thing. I think we've also got to bear in mind as to where we are. We're in South Lanarkshire, we employ 600 people, we're by far the biggest employer in what is a very rural area. Like a lot of industrial factories, many of the people come to the state hospital, their mother and father might have worked there, their uncle and aunts, that type of thing. So there is a very community-orientated culture about the place, and that has helped us. And historically, in all honesty, we have had no real problem in terms of attracting staff, except currently what is now becoming a bit of a problem for us with nursing staff is attracting male nursing. And as you can imagine, from a certain perspective, having the right balance between male and female is pretty critical. The area that we are struggling at the minute is attracting male nurses.
Add anything on that front?
Yeah, so in terms of a general response, I mean, our student nurses that come through the state hospital report a very positive experience of the state hospital as a learning environment, and reflect back to me positive experience of that as a care environment as well. And I'm always pleased to see when students come back through into the state hospital seeking jobs as registrants. So we have a fairly regular supply of students coming through that line. We are also increasingly engaging proactively with our higher education institution partners and reaching out to the universities when students are in their final year of their educational programmes to try and recruit directly off the programme. So again, we're going out and selling the State Hospital offer as early as we possibly can. Over the past 2 years or so, we've developed a really positive relationship with the Open University, and what that's started to deliver for us are different development opportunities for nursing assistants, for example, who can join the State Hospital, but providing they meet the criteria, can have a pathway into a registrant role through the Open University. So we've currently got 7 nursing assistants doing that just now, with 5 of them just started in the last year. Another important factor, which I think the Chair's already touched on already, or certainly our Chief Executive has, is the importance of personal development planning for our staff as an element of retention. We do very well with our personal development planning and associated activities within the State Hospital, with almost 90% of our staff across all areas having a current personal development plan. So we do have challenges, but we are working actively to try and address them.
Gary Jenkins.
Thank you very much. Then maybe one other aspect that I would add in there as well, the other thing that we're looking at for 1920 is the role of modern apprentices. So again, recognising that boards should have youth employment on their work stream. We're looking to see how we could progress modern apprentices within the State Hospital as well, and also help them with employability in the local area.
Yes, please.
I thought, does Ms Thompson want to go in there? No?
No, sorry.
No.
Well, I could widen it out just to say, obviously nursing staff are by far our largest cohort of staff, but for other staff, it's important that we provide an attractive environment to get them usually to travel to the State Hospital. And we do that in a number of ways, but by making attractive posts, portfolio posts, perhaps with people working not just within the State Hospital, but within other forensic network sites. So in other NHS services, in prisons, wherever that might be. So that helps us across the forensic network fill at times some gaps, but it also makes for more interesting posts, and it also stops issues of institutionalisation, which when you all work behind a big fence can arise.
On the part where you mentioned Open University and obviously students coming through, do you keep percentage numbers of returners who obviously, if it's student nurses who come to train, how many actually come back? You know, do you keep the percentage wise?
I don't formally know.
No. Just for me anyway, it might have been helpful to know how
something.
many
That we could
come
look
back.
at, yes.
In that respect, I mean, you seem to be doing a lot to attract people, and obviously it's keeping them there is one of the important things as well. In regards to retirement, which I mentioned at the beginning, Mr. Curry, there is this huge amount of people, and you said experience obviously is very important, and I absolutely agree with that. But the number of people, and I've got the numbers here, most of the nursing staff are between the ages of 50 and 54. So obviously that's going to have a knock-on effect. So the work that you're carrying out, do you think that will be successful in the short term or the long term in regards to retirement age and ages of the nursing staff?
If I may open the comment up in that. So you're absolutely right, 93 nursing staff within that age cohort. So what we've identified is clearly that we have a risk in the coming 4 to 8 year period that we have to be able to attract staff and to maintain staff. In terms of understanding our staff and needing our workforce development plan going forward, some of the work that we've been doing just now is on rebasing the staffing establishment as part of the clinical model, so that we absolutely understand in the coming years the number of staff, the types of staff that we need to attract and we need to bring to the State Hospital to deliver the clinical services that are required. At this current point in time, we have worked through almost 60% of the organisation, so we have worked through the profile and the staff configuration for the clinical model going forward, which we would look to start implementing from April. But there are a number of other staff members, obviously allied health professionals, estates, facilities and housekeeping that we need to make sure are an integral part of that model too. So we have begun the work, we have identified nursing as our main risk area over the coming 4 to 8 year period. And what we're trying to do just now is put in place a sustainable workforce plan. We'll be taking that through the board in the December session to outline our intention, and then to look at how we work with educational establishments or the forensic network to try to bring those staff to the state hospital. There may be opportunities through the review of the forensic mental health estate to look at greater collaboration with other services. And we will be aware of those obviously in the late spring of next year, but we've certainly started that work just now, and we're trying to baseline our establishment. I'll give you just maybe one example, if that's all right. So if we look at the current configuration of our intellectual disability service, we would be moving from 1 ward to 2 wards, so it would be the equivalent 12 up to 24 beds. Now, the workforce need in intellectual disability patient management is different to male mental illness. So recognising that we're moving forward with that service delivery model, Mr Richards has already approached educational establishments to come in and do tailored training for us so that we can actually develop staff with those skills. So what we want to do is try and tailor a programme of work over that 4 to 8 year period that brings the correct staff, enables us to identify with educational establishments and other areas around how we maintain the staff levels going forward that are needed to deliver a rebased establishment within the state hospital.
Chair, thank you. So I would take it then that that's the new workforce plan which you have put into force. It came in September. So basically, is that what you're working towards, and you've actually instigated it just now?
That we've completed around 60% of it. So in the clinical model, if you like, so the 610 whole-time equivalents, and we have gone through effectively around 340 posts to look at what will be required in the reconfigured clinical model for the state hospital. Perhaps more importantly as well, we've tried to look at the staffing levels. So we've been, for the first time, looking at benchmarking services, NHS England benchmarking services, to see what other high secure and medium secure services have as part of their staffing establishment. We've done early work using the pilot tools of the Health and Care Staffing Bill to look and make sure that we're within the correct ballpark excuse me, of our predictions. And those are the models we're using to try and give us a future-proofed model that enables us to be absolutely confident that when the legislation comes in and we're running the tools, that we are not out with the norm in there. But as I say, also on the value for money and understanding our effectiveness, trying to look at other high secure and medium secure providers to make sure that we are in the same range with our staffing profile.
Chair, just one of the issues that I was interested in, I think you may be working towards that, is obviously you're changing your model slightly and a wee bit more flexibility. So one of the questions I wanted to ask was that basically band 1 to 4 has risen, which is a lower rate, and band 5 to 9 nurses has fallen. I just wonder, you know, what's the reason for that? Is it because of the flexibility you're saying, or the differences you're working towards?
No, because we haven't implemented that model yet. As I say, we know what the model is, so that will be from April onwards. We have looked, maybe if I just come to the band 4 post, we have looked at trying to role develop other members of staff. So, for example, Mr Richards might be more eloquent at describing this than I am. But if you look at things like the patient active day, to make sure that during the hours of 9 to 5, patients who would be in our transitions ward actually utilise the full resources of the hospital to benefit them in terms of physical activities and stimulation. We've been looking at a different type of role in there that might see a new band 4 support worker role developed. So we've not specifically gone through the grades to look at a change in there, but actually trying to profile going forward to get the most appropriate staffing levels in there. I don't know, Mark, if you could perhaps describe that a little better than I.
Yes. So feedback that we regularly get within the hospital, particularly from our patient group, is they would like to be more active more often, which is perfectly understandable, and to have access to activity 7 days a week. Our shift pattern, particularly for nurses within the hospital, is a very traditional continental style shift pattern of day shifts, back shifts and night shifts, which doesn't always best lend itself to supporting activity, particularly when that needs to take place off ward. So part of the planning work that we've been focused on is how we can adjust roles that we have within the hospital, adjust the workforce profile to create the 9 to 5 activity focused roles that Mr Jenkins was referring to a moment ago, and through introducing those roles into the workforce, be able to deliver more activity for our patients. Back to your earlier point about staff retention, those roles we are anticipating will be at band 4, so that would allow some career progression opportunities for unregistered staff within the hospital as well.
Could I? Oh, sorry. I just wanted to push that a wee bit more. So basically, what you're saying is, and you know, somebody moving up from band 1 to band 4, yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. But it seems to me, listen to the evidence, and we know that some of the activities, you know, basically they've been closed, not so much closed, but access has been restricted, and patients have actually had to spend more time in the rooms. So band 1 to 4 give more access, 9 to 5 for physical activity, and then the bands above that, which is the more experienced bands, there's less of them. So I wonder what impact that has on the care of the patients at the state hospital.
So within all of that, our skills mix for the nursing workforce is still projected to be 60% registrants, so 60% qualified staff and 40% unqualified within that. So that's what I am projecting within the workforce plan for the hospital.
Can you there's quite a range of changes in staffing models and examinations and so on that you've indicated. How far are staff involved in these discussions and their representative bodies? How far are they engaged in making these decisions for change? Gary Jenkins.
So, thank you very much. So again, actually in October and November, as I mentioned, probably over half of the workforce we have involved in this consultation process, personally through workshops, through visits to wards. What we wanted to do, and it was back to how do we communicate in a better way, another theme of Sturrock. Now you might imagine, because the state hospital is one site, it's quite easy to bring people together. But obviously, because of the risk factors involved, you need to have critical numbers of staffing on the ward and in patient areas at any one time. So one of the measures that we did this time was actually, rather than put out a bit of paper or a bulletin, we set up a series of engagement events with all staff. So what we all did was actually go out to the wards, come in at shift changeovers to set up presentations, to have discussions with staff. We were able within that process to actually answer direct questions that staff may otherwise have had concerns about that we couldn't address or tackle at the time. So we found that approach, or the feedback from that approach, has been very, very successful, and I think it's something that we need to embed more going forward, so that we are actually out either as executive sponsors to that ward, so that we're there and we're visible and there's a consistency for staff, that staff feel absolutely free to approach us. And in relation to your point in partnership, all of this has been done in partnership. We've taken all the reports and updates through the partnership forum, and partnership are fully supportive of working with us. In fact, partnership have put forward some very productive suggestions around about how we do the change process, which follows on, we mentioned experience, but follows on from the change process in 2011. So we've been trying to learn lessons from that, embed new ways of working that actually make staff feel more engaged, and learn the lessons of the past to take into the future to try and give a far more comprehensive service.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper.
Thanks, Convener. Good morning to everyone. I'm interested in a couple of questions about the local delivery plan or the annual operation plan. We've had standards or targets and they've been changed over the years, going from heat targets to local delivery plan, and then now we've got an annual operational plan, and often it focuses on performance, finance and workforce. And I'm also interested in one of our notes in front of us. It talks about the state hospital reached or surpassed the targets for access to psychological therapies and for access to a GP or other appropriate health professional. So that's good news that you've reached or surpassed those targets. And I'm interested in about the annual operating plan has a focus on continuous improvement approach, and there's 14 strategies. I won't name them all, but it is interesting. Obesity is one, and looking at supporting a forward-looking culture, creating conditions for supporting quality assurance and quality improvement and change. So there's lots of aims and actions to be measured. So how would you track it? How will you measure these outcomes so that you know that you are achieving these objectives and standards and priorities?
Again, I'll come in on that. We have a very complex suite of key performance indicators that shows for each of those headlines that you mentioned, there's a whole suite of key performance indicators that sit underneath those headlines. Those targets and actions are monitored through, obviously, the groups, through the governance committees, and then into the board. We need to be cognizant of our place in a modern National Health Service. So we have been refreshing our key performance indicators. That's a piece of work that we've undertaken in the last 6 months, and it's still ongoing, so that we would hope to identify almost a balanced scorecard approach to red, amber and green areas within all of our metrics. The reason for doing that, again, is around about accountability, so that we can actually point the governance committees to the areas of risk for us. We can show transparency and we can show progress against our targets. But we probably need to refine and bring all of those metrics into one performance scorecard that at a glance gives overall scrutiny and governance to the non-execs and to the board to show what our performance framework looks like. We will continue to develop that. Obviously, as we go forward, we would take that through the audit committee to seek additional assurance that the measures that we're taking are absolutely correct. But we continue to review all of the metrics that sit beneath those headline strategic objectives.
Okay, yeah. And so as you're, I guess, moving forward for key performance indicators and measuring it and comparing, I suppose, with other health boards who have similar objectives, although obviously the state hospital is slightly different in how care is delivered. How do you communicate this to the public then about the performance of the state hospital?
Sure. Thank you. So in our annual report, I think we need to get better at demystifying some of the work of the state hospital. I think we need to get better at being transparent about some of the detail of what we're trying to achieve so that we can communicate that out. I think through collaboration with the Mental Health Directorate and understanding the key priorities for mental health, we should start to try to focus in on those particular metrics. You mentioned obviously psychological therapies, which we clearly would be very successful in delivering. But I think through the 3-year plan, the 3-year annual operational plan, which we will produce for this coming 3-year session, we should be able to better define the metrics that we would like to reassure the general public on, but also build in, for example, more features on our safety measures, on our health and safety measures, and on our public protection measures to make sure that members of the public are reassured that the dual aspect of clinical care, but within a high security environment, are actually transparent but easily interpreted when you go to look at the scrutiny of what we do.
Very correct.
The point you make about communications with the public is a very well made point, and it's one we have some difficulty with, but we're now raising the priority in that. Historically, we have held our board meetings within the State Hospital. As you can imagine, that is not a particularly attractive proposition for a member of the public to come in, to go through the security and attend our board meetings. As a result, we very, very rarely have members of the public attending the board meetings. I think in my time there have been a couple of press people there, but no members of the public. Similarly with our annual review has tended to be held within the confines of the State Hospital, and therefore the public presentations are done primarily to staff, and it's staff in fact that attend our board meetings. You know, we invite staff if they're interested to come along to a particular board meeting to come and sit in. But as of just now, and it was part of the corporate governance review that we undertook, we have decided to hold 2 board meetings a year beyond the State Hospital, and we are going to hold for the first time ever our public annual review out with the State Hospital. We don't really know what reception we'll get to that, but we will never know until we try. But we know that we've got to make more of an effort to engage with the public.
That just sounds quite like a good idea to, you know, get people out, because I'm sure it is quite intimidating for members of the public to go through. I know it is for me when I go and visit our local prison as well. So, and I'm also interested, like, it's hard to measure everything sometimes. So you talked about excellence in care awards, but so if the staff members are recognised for providing excellent care, then that might be measurable if we look at a reduction in sickness, absence, and then maintain that level of reduction in sickness and absence. Is that one way that you can measure that way of delivery of care as well?
Yes, most certainly. One of the in explaining the reasons why we have made such an improvement in our sickness and absence, a lot of the things we tend to quote are we tightened up compliance, we trained managers better. But one of the other key parts of that strategy was to up our level of recognition and appreciation. And the Excellence Awards is something that's been developed through this calendar year as part of our staff engagement and an improvement in values and behaviours.
Okay.
Lindsay Thompson.
Thank you. So part of what we do, as well as all of our key performance indicators, is actually have a suite of outcome measures, clinical outcome measures for our patients. And you can have, there are 8 of these, and behind each one would be a wealth of other data, but we've divided it into 8 areas. And the individual can have their own outcomes. We can look on a ward basis, we can look on a hub basis, or of course we can look on a hospital-wide basis. And those include measures of mental health. So how is an individual's health improving, for example, in terms of psychotic symptoms? There are their physical health, for which, while we have our whole raft of information, we use BMI, so obesity, overweight levels, as an basic indicator. The individual's own assessment of their well-being using the core measure. We look at social engagement, for example, visitors. We look at progression through those on the transfer list. We look at activities. So we have 8 measures in total that we look to follow the progress of the individual or of our population as a whole.
Much. Gary Jenkins.
Could I maybe just one final point? I think one of the other challenges that we have in the State Hospital is in relation to how we promote the work that we do, because we're entirely sensitive to the fact that for the work of a modern healthcare establishment, we do need to be terribly cognizant that there are a number of associated victim issues in relation to some of the index offences. So we're very mindful that we need to be sensitive about how we promote the work, how we do that, and how we publicise that. I absolutely recognise this is a good time for changing attitudes toward mental health. We've engaged with CME, we've engaged with other mental health voluntary organisations to try to look at perceptions of the state hospital and to look at how we might promote a more active, engaged media strategy around what we do, but recognising the sensitivity that that may have in the context of public opinion on mentally disordered offenders.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Curry, do you want to tell us when and where your annual review will be?
We haven't got a specific date, but it will be held during the summer of 2020. That's the indication we've had from the government.
And out with the State Hospital in your expectation. Thank you very much. David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning to the panel. Could I raise the issue about inappropriate level of security? You will obviously be aware that the Mental Welfare Commission visited in September, and they raised the issue of a couple of occasions of inappropriate levels of security. I understand this is under the Exceptional Circumstances Clause, where a patient is held at higher security because there isn't availability of medium or lower security. What are the implications, and twofold, first of all for the treatment of these patients, and secondly, and equally importantly, for civil liberties?
Thank you. So I think you're raising two issues there. If I take exceptional circumstances first of all, across the forensic network, we introduced the option of a bed being made available within the state hospital in exceptional circumstances. And those were where a patient clearly needed medium security. So we're not talking about anybody requiring low security or any other form of psychiatric care, only those who clearly required medium security, but a bed was not available within the medium secure setting. And the particular concern was for those individuals who might find themselves very unwell, and usually in a prison setting, and about how could we develop a mechanism to allow that individual to access care. And so we developed the exceptional circumstances to allow for that. Over the years that we have had this, we have generally had between 0 and 2 cases at any one time. At the present time, there are 4 cases admitted to the state hospital under exceptional circumstances. So in terms of how it impacts on their care, I am of the view that it gives them the care that they need. So in terms of treatment of their mental illness or their mental disorder, meeting their psychological needs, their rehabilitation needs and so on, and putting them in the right place where they can be cared for, I believe that it is in the interests of the individual. Then you raised the second issue of civil liberties. So the individual is then finding themselves in a high secure rather than in a medium secure environment. And that will have an impact. And we have to acknowledge that impact, that with the best will in the world of making crystal clear that it was an exceptional circumstance admission, the individual may still have the label of being somebody who required care and treatment in the state hospital. Now, while we are always working to reduce the stigma of such a label, we have to recognise that is there. So there are issues around that. There are also issues of rights of appeal and so on, which are set there with the patient. So we are balancing meeting the needs to find a healthcare provision for those individuals against some of the issues around liberties or labels that we've addressed. And I think that ultimately it is in the patient's better interest to have that exceptional circumstance there. Clearly, it would be better if we had further state developments, but I'll let you come in there.
Thank you. The obvious point is, why do we not have sufficient medium and low security? Because there will be issues clearly about treatment. Your staff will be geared up to maximum security. I accept there will be an overlapping experience for medium secure patients. But I suppose the key point for me would be, is this a breach of the European Convention of Human Rights? And clearly this is for to answer my own question, this is for the courts to decide. But I understand that there is currently 2 appeals to the Supreme Court in terms of excessive delays. Is that correct?
This is where you've got a second issue and we're confusing two issues, but can I just deal with the estate issue from a forensic network perspective? The forensic network had a whole workshop on the estate issues, so that's dealing high, medium, low and out into the community. We went to the Chief Executives group, this was in January 2018, with 6 recommendations, all of which were accepted, including a recommendation for increased medium secure beds. It's in the west of Scotland that the primary need is there. So those have not all been enacted, but plans were there to look at the estate. And what you see, the Forensic Network does the longitudinal bed planning, what you see is blockages then from the medium to the low secure, so that we can't move people out of low secure and on into the community that's knocking back.
Just to be clear, because the public who are watching might not necessarily understand the technical details you're raising. Currently, you've no defined medium secure beds within your establishment, is that correct?
There are, at the present time, we have a weekly bed report, and I think there are 1 or 2 beds for males. There are also, I think, 1 bed for females in the medium secure estate.
In terms of Scotland-wide provision, I understand you're not responsible for all of that. If you were planning a development of medium and low security beds, there is clearly a gap because there's patients being inappropriately housed within your establishment in the exceptional clause.
Right, now this, can I come to the second issue, because we're in danger of conflating the two issues of exceptional circumstances and then excessive security, and they're completely separate. So exceptional circumstances was a mechanism we introduced to stop people being stuck in a prison setting. Excessive security appeals are set out in the Mental Health Care and Treatment Act 2003. And that gives an individual a right of appeal against their security level. And it was introduced initially purely for high security, so you could appeal high to medium, and in recent years has been brought in also from medium, so individuals can appeal who are in medium security. So there are 2 separate issues within the hospital, at the state hospital at present time. We have regular excessive security appeals. Those are held by the Mental Health Tribunal for Scotland. We have at the moment 26 patients on our transfer list. 18 are fully accepted by receiving service, so they've been all through the assessment process and have been accepted, and over half of those will have taken out exceptional, excessive security appeals. One of those now, it was 3, but 2 have now moved on. One of those now is beyond the timescales of the excessive security appeals. So the local health board, the receiving health board, has not found a bed within the timescale set out by the Mental Health Tribunal. So I think it's absolutely important to separate out the 2 issues. They are different, but they are related to having appropriate resources in the right place.
Thank you for clarifying that. The point I was trying to raise, is there a shortage of medium and low security beds in Scotland?
So the answer to that would be yes. If we look at the estate as a whole, when we look at the medium secure beds, if we could move everybody down to the low secure, our medium secure would be very full, which would be operating at a capacity in the high 90s, which you really wouldn't want any system to do. The issue then is the low secure provision, and of course it's moving the low secure into the community. But a simple answer to your question is yes, we clearly have issues with beds.
Right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Alex, go ahead.
Mina, good morning to the panel. I'd like to follow on from David Stewart's line of questioning, if I may. Lindsay Thompson, you said very briefly in one answer that you gave to David Stewart that that you thought there were changes that government could make to improve the situation of either the emergency circumstances or the excessive security provision. What kind of changes would you like to see?
So we had the 6 recommendations go to the chief executives, setting out the different issues. The issue that we're addressing here is primarily about the beds in medium and low secure. Those then decisions on developments sit with individual health boards. So we have plans, the numbers are there in the annual report on the longitudinal bed position, but we really need to look to develop more of those services. Now, the government, as you will know, has commissioned, and the Minister has commissioned, an independent review of the delivery of forensic mental health services. We, from the Forensic Network perspective, have given all of this data on beds and needs to the chair of that review, and we would expect to see recommendations coming forward from that.
Also on that, I think it's fair to say that I was alarmed, well not alarmed, I can understand why it's happening, but in terms of the excessive security appeals that you had, you mentioned one individual at present who has overwent the period of time that they would have expected to see that appeal actioned. How common is that, and what sort of recourse do the patients have to justice or to representation around that?
It is not common. Mostly beds are found within that period. As I say, it's been most unusual that we have had 3, but 2 have literally gone in the last few weeks, so it does suggest a pressure within the system. Ultimately, I think the individual can ask for a judicial review of their position, and the teeth behind the...
Who would fund that judicial review? Because judicial reviews are not cheap.
No, it would be legal aid. All of our patients are well represented legally and can take that forward through their lawyers. The teeth behind the excessive security appeals legislation is the Court of Session Act, which ultimately holds any public body responsible for enacting legal decisions, such that chairs or chief execs, but you're on the different board of this side of the equation, can find themselves in the dock as to why something has not been enacted that should be.
Thank you for that. Final question from me, Convener, if I may, and this is directed at Terry Curry. This is also about civil liberties, and it was just something that you said, Terry, in your opening remarks to the convener's first question about the smoking ban, and you then went on to say that you were looking to get equally radical around obesity, and my slight concern about that is smoking in public places is you have a statutory basis on which to enact that ban, but no such statutory basis exists for any kind of ban on eating of fatty or sugary foods, and I think there's a dangerous sort of civil liberties line that we're crossing here. I just wanted you to sort of expand on that statement.
No, I think you're quite right, and I think that's what enabled us to make a lot more progress with smoking than we have with obesity. But we always recognise the element of civil liberties, and when I talk about doing something more radical, I talk about something that's internally within our control, the control of the type of goods that we sell within our own shop, etc. But by the same token, the civil liberties of the individual patients are foremost in our minds. Lindsay used the term balancing quite a lot, and that very much applies to this.
That's helpful, thank you.
Thank you very much. Briefly, Lindsay Thompson.
Yes, I mean, I just want to come in there because this issue of being overweight and obese is hugely important to us. We did do...
Can I say we'll come back to that issue?
Are you coming back?
If
That's
we may?
fine.
Yeah, because I'd like to ask a little bit more in relation to the independent review of forensic medical science and services. And just so that we're clear as to the current position more broadly, can you tell us how many patients there currently are in the State Hospital and whether there is currently any unused bed capacity? Gary Jenkins.
Wait, we have a total, sorry, on you go, Greg. On you go.
So we have 108 patients in the State Hospital today. That figure has increased slightly. You mentioned bed capacity. Looking back over the previous 4-year period, we have never exceeded 120 patients. So we recognise that we have to rebase our model on 120 patients at this point in time, which is what our clinical model is trying to do, to make sure we have the most efficient use of resources and that we target those resources to the correct areas. The hospital itself, you're right, we have 2 wards closed. So the hospital itself does have capacity for 144 overall. That was developed in the new hospital model in 2011. But there is at this point in time, there is not a need to have those number of beds. What I would say, of course, is that 1 ward closed is a good contingency for us in relation to if there is a challenge in 1 ward, we would be able to relocate patients. And also, if you look at the contingency plans for Round Bank, you'd mentioned the medium secure units. If there was a catastrophic challenge with one of the medium secure units, we would also be able to provide capacity at the State Hospital as well to try and house patients.
Do those numbers suggest that there's been a decline in demand or in requirement for high secure places, and is that something that you predict to continue, or is it simply serendipity of numbers over a couple of years?
Okay. Lindsay, if you want to go first now.
Lindsay Thompson.
Well, I'm very pleased to say that we have, I think, finally got our pathways of care in a better place. We do still have blockages that we've clearly just discussed, but in years gone by, there were the beds in the State Hospital and very little else anywhere around the country. Now we have a proper pyramid of care with high secure, medium secure, low, and out into the community. And so what we have seen, unsurprisingly, is that there has been reduced demand on the high, more to the medium and more to the low.
Ask, and you follow up on that, I know, but can I ask, in following that up, what are the implications of that change for staffing and for future plans in the establishment?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, looking back at those change in patient numbers, that's where we've tried again, and I know I mentioned it earlier, to rebase our clinical model based on that level of patient demand. I think what's important, maybe just to reiterate the point that Professor Thompson had highlighted, is that the number of patients in the forensic population, if you take high, medium, low and community services, has broadly stayed the same. So I think I would reiterate the point that it's the ability to move patients through the levels of security tailored to their specific needs. That has been a success of introducing medium secure services, but obviously, as your colleague had pointed out earlier, there becomes a challenge when you start to bottleneck with patients going from medium through to low and from low through to the community. So certainly an opportunity through the review of forensic mental health services is to look at how we more effectively manage that overall estate for Scotland so that no patients are unnecessarily detained or blocked from progressing through the appropriate levels of security based on their needs.
One of the other, or two of the other areas that the review will consider are the case of women and also the case of young people, and there are no specific facilities as such at the high secure end, and quite a number of women, for example, are in medium secure units in England. So I wonder what the projection or expectation is and what your evidence will be to that review. Gary Jenkins.
So I'll maybe just start on that, if that's all right. So the high secure service is provided nationally in Rampton in England. So there's 50 beds in England for high security female patients. We undertook an exercise, Professor Thompson's already alluded to that, to try and look at pathways for high secure services for females. we undertook a workshop on options appraisal, which will now feed in obviously to the review of the forensic mental health estate to determine where the best provision could be for high security services for females if they were in Scotland. What we recognised is that the number goes from 0 to 3. So it's a very small specialist number of patients who would need to access that type of service, and we look at the risks obviously of trying to provide that type of service that's not in a central location for a very small patient cohort. I'll maybe ask Professor Thompson just to expand on that point if there's anything you'd like to.
Thank you. So we're talking about 60 women, and we're talking about equity of provision was one of the concerns that was raised. And so the working group that our Chief Executive mentioned carried out options appraisals for high, medium, low secure and the community. And the decisions that were taken.
Gary Jenkins talked about up to 3 women in the most high secure facilities. Yes. 60 is a number that applies to high and medium.
All women in
and
secure
security.
services,
Yep, okay.
yes. So the issues were, firstly, the high secure women and the fact that they have to cross border to different legislation, obviously far from their home. At the present time, there are 2 women within the Rampton service. The outcome of the options appraisal there was to co-locate high and medium secure, so have them conjoined with the ability then to have shared staff and maintenance of staff skills, so that you never had a period where you had no women requiring that service and issues about maintenance of the staff skills. The second issue was to ensure that we always had female-only accommodation within our medium secure units. At the present time, 1 unit is mixed, and that came out with the options appraisal for the medium secure. And then the third issue that we had was low secure. At the present time, if you are a woman in Scotland in need of low secure forensic mental health services, just over 30 of them will be in the Ayr Clinic, which is an independent facility, obviously based in Ayr, and so you've been taken away from your family and your home area. And the proposal there is for a hybrid mechanism for smaller health boards, regional units, so health boards would come together, and for the larger health boards, they would obviously be able to have their local low secure units with the community services. And these 3 options appraisals, whilst this is all clearly within the remit of the independent review, they're actually gone forward to the National Planning Board, and there is a short life working group which has its second meeting this week, looking to take forward those recommendations.
And that will presumably come to a view as to which of these options to favour and put that to ministers.
No, those were the 3 options. Those 3 options were all agreed upon by the Network Short Life Working Group. Scottish Government is aware of the report and the findings, and they're also aware that because of this piece of work was done through Chief Executive Officers and then sent from there to the National Planning Board, they are aware that there is a Short Life Working Group taking this forward. It's a slightly difficult position in that nobody wants to stop the work, because obviously the review, recommendations for the review and enacting those could take a long time. On the other hand, it is open to the review to come up with different ideas than the 3 options that were clearly being set out by the Short Life Working Group. So we're trying to progress, but in conjunction with the knowledge of the review and talking to the review staff, and also with our Scottish Government colleagues. Okay,
thank you very much. And young people, is there any particular provision or prospect of provision in that regard?
Sure.
Gary Jenkins.
I'll maybe, again, you've been involved in the commission of the child and adolescent mental health process. We don't have any patients under the age of 20 in the state hospital, but there is obviously recognised in the national plan for mental health services, development of services for young people. And I say I know you've been involved quite recently in the working group, so again, apologies if you don't mind coming back just to give an overview of that process.
Lindsay Thompson.
Thank you. There is a proposal for a national secure adolescent inpatient service. NHS Ayrshire and Arran have developed this proposal. I'm chairing their stakeholder group. It was recently approved by Scottish Government to move from the outline business case to the full business case. So this is a unit proposed for 12 young people, and it will be our first formal inpatient forensic mental health service for adolescents in Scotland. I think the effect of such a unit will be broader in that when we look around the country, the provision for adolescents in this area is extremely patchy and in many areas of the country non-existent. So I think once you have a national service like this, you will inevitably get a networking effect, and you will strengthen not inpatient provision, because you only need the one inpatient service, we can see that from the numbers, but you will strengthen the expertise and the knowledge around the country. So I think its effect will be broader than just the inpatient beds alone.
Thank you very much. Sandra White.
May I be allowed to just ask an add-on question supplementary to what you had mentioned? Having served on the Justice Committee, I recollect a case where ECHR came into force in regards to prisoners' rights and people being able to visit prisoners. Can you clarify for me that we're talking about there's young people who are spread all over England because there's no secure units here for them, it mentions in the notes, and also female patients as well. Does ECHR come into force in that people should be allowed to be somewhere where they're within reach of their family being able to visit them?
Yes, there are young people south of the border in specialist units, and the work of the NHS Ayrshire and Arran clearly set that out, and therefore in doing their needs assessments and numbers that they would be bringing back to Scotland, that is there. We don't have a lot of women south of the...
I know you've been here a long time, there's other questions, but the question I wanted to ask was, would you be in breach of the human rights of these patients by scattering them throughout the UK and not near where their relatives are?
Oh, okay, so you'd be really there on rights to family life. I'm sure that as ever, all of these things can be challenged legally. We've always got a balance when we're talking about services for small numbers as to how you provide that in a way that has the expertise to deal with that.
You're in breach.
No, but by
sending
sending...
policy, that's the point I'm trying to make.
Well, I'm going to...
yes or no, if you could give us that one before I ask my question.
To swerve this one and say that's one for the lawyers and the courts to decide on. I can see that the arguments could be made.
Okay, I may ask the committee if they want to write that one, but it was just something that was in my mind, having been through it in the Justice Committee in evidence as well. Actually, I wanted to ask about the new clinical model. And I know, Mr Jenkins, you mentioned in reply to the convener in regards to, you went to the new clinical model, and I think you mentioned previously to one of my questions as well about the new hubs or the beds which are being introduced, because from the notes that we have been given, when we're talking about violent incidents, these have actually increased, and I don't know what this definition is, but I'll read it out, and I'm sure you do know exactly what the definition is, but apparently there's been a huge increase in major incidents in the intellectual disability population. So maybe in layman's speak, you may tell us the difference between that and major illness population, just for the benefit of not just me, but perhaps others as well. And is that why you've moved to the new clinical model, perhaps?
Thank you very much. So there was a key feature looking at the safety report, which looked to see the trends of assault and violence from patients to staff. That trend was up over the 4-year period that was analysed through to 2018. subdividing into that trend is to try and look at within which patient cohort are we experiencing that. And the statistics are quite revealing. So one particular, I think there were 3 patients accounted for 84% of assaults. So we were trying to look at the proportions within the patient cohort and how that would help us with safety features in the new clinical model. Safety features through the benefits criteria were number 1, as you might imagine, from staff, security and safety. So within the clinical model, you mentioned the intellectual disability population. So these are male mental illness patients who would be classified as having learning disabilities. Within that cohort of patient, although it's a lot smaller, so the 12 beds there, they would be the most highly assaultative patients, and the number of those patients that need the most disassociations, which means that you would try not to keep all 12 people together in the one ward because of the challenges of doing that. So within the clinical model, recognising that feature, we looked initially at some improvement measures that we could put in place, just at a local level, but throughout the clinical model process, we're very keen to promote that was one of the key challenges that we had to address. Hence, looking at moving to 2 intellectual disability wards with more tailored staffing and a more appropriate clinical environment, we would expect to see as one of the key measures a reduction in the levels and patterns of violence in there. The other component that we've built in, which is new, is actually a 3-monthly review period for the operations and working of the hospital. So recognising that, unlike an acute hospital where you can move things very, very quickly, you multiply and exacerbate risks if you try to reorganise the state hospital overnight. So we're looking at how we do the phasing of that model, and we're looking to ensure that we don't wait, that there is a multi-professional review process that every 90 days will review trends and difficulties or benefits associated with the clinical model change that we can either put into good practice in other parts of the hospital estate, or that we can modify and very quickly act on any challenges that come up throughout there. The other patient cohort that was perhaps a surprise to us, you might think that the admission cohorts of patients who are just admitted would be highly assaultative, but actually what we found is that patients in the middle stage, if you like, the treatment and recovery stage rather than the post-discharge stage, also presented more problems and challenges around about assaultative and violent behaviours. So again, within the clinical model, we haven't put the staff in detail in there, but certainly we've looked to really increase the levels of staffing that are associated with those cohorts of patients. So we have very sophisticated measures now that actually enabled us to try and target in the clinical model measures that we think will be successful, but to look objectively every 90 days to ensure it's working and to take immediate action if it's not working, so that we don't needlessly expose.
Sorry for interrupting. Do you have any results in regards to the new clinical model that you're carrying out? And after the 90 days, we've not got that yet, no?
It's April 2020 onwards, the
right.
clinical model
so we
goes
need
in.
To wait till
so,
then.
so, yes, so that's we've concluded the plan, and as I mentioned, we've done the consultation with staff, and what we have just now is a series of working groups that are in place to oversee the implementation of that clinical model. And one other point that's probably relevant is that when we designed the clinical model, so for example, if you look at how you might traditionally manage that, we managerially thought perhaps we should have a high dependency ward. So for patients who are very assaultive, we should put them into a specific area. But when we spoke to the clinical forum to get objective advice and as staff, obviously that came back as that you would not do that because you're going to increase the risk to the staff working in those particular areas, and therefore a better distribution would be not to move forward. So again, just an example of listening where we said, we should rule that out of the clinical model, but we can come back and revisit it if needs determined as part of our review cycle.
Because I know time is short, we've been here a long time.
Sorry.
Just one tiny supplementary in regards, I think it was previous question as well, in regards to patients being locked in the room and woodwork classes, that type of thing as well, which has obviously come into perhaps obesity too. Is that beneficial then? Would they be able to come out of their wards and be able to utilise that? Is that what you're working towards as well?
It absolutely is. So it's a whole system designing process, and probably the most beneficial aspect of this is to enable patients to feel a sense of progression in their journey through the hospital. So just now you have a mixed economy. In some wards you will have admission patients, you will have treatment and recovery patients, intellectual disability patients, and patients awaiting discharge. That can, depending on admissions and the status of the patient, disturb, it's called the therapeutic milieu of the ward. So we actually feel that by designing a service that gives an admission and assessment process, a treatment and recovery process, transitions and intellectual disability separate, that we're able to more focus the resources, the treatments and the activities to patients within this cohort, so that not only do staff benefit from specialisation, should they wish to work in a particular area, but the benefit to patients in their ongoing treatment pathway is also tangible and felt by the patient, that they are progressing through the hospital to perhaps a medium security service or to a prison service.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Emma Harper.
Thank you, Convener. I'm going to ask a few questions about how do we tackle and challenge obesity. And it says here, according to the annual report, that the percentage of patients who had a healthier BMI decreased from 15.8% in 2017-18 to 13.17% in 2018-19. I know it's really challenging to manage weight because antipsychotic medications can help people or can make people crave for food, and then there's issues of obviously activity and managing it all together. So it's not just as simple as you have to exercise more when you're managing complex medication and things like that. So it would be interesting to hear how do you manage it? What do you do? Are the staff skilled and trained to help support the challenge of managing obesity in your patients?
Lindsay Thompson.
Thank you. It is, I think, our number one clinical priority, which may seem rather strange given our major purpose, is at the moment, how do we improve the physical health of our patients? Mention was made earlier by our chair of the fact that patients with major mental illness, most of our patients have schizophrenia, will die 15 to 20 years earlier. And we have shown this within our own cohort by following up our own patients from the state hospital. Men lost on average 15 years of their lives, and for the women, when we did have women at that time, it was 24. And the majority of the causes are respiratory or cardiovascular. So we took the steps with the smoking, and now our big challenge is on the obesity. So in 2016, the board approved a 15-point plan, which went from provision of information to increased activity, the introduction of health and wellbeing plans, and yes, staff are skilled, for example, in nutritional screening tools, and we have access to dietitians, members of our staff, to quite radical things. We were the first hospital-based shop in Scotland to bring in the healthy retail standards. We haven't gone with the requirement, which is 50-50 for healthy versus unhealthy products, but have gone 80% healthy. We did away with the external procurement. And so through these different points, we had very much thought that we would see an improvement in our figures. And we analysed it in a number of different ways. We've looked at the population as a whole. Now, people come in and people go out, and I can tell you that people are coming in a bit heavier, so that in of itself is of interest. But we've also looked at our different populations in terms of the admission cohort, and then those who are ongoing and who've been with us throughout. And we are not seeing improvement in any of these groups. And one of our concerns that I was going to mention earlier, and why I think our chair used the term, do we need to be more radical, is this isn't a case purely of people coming to us with these issues and us not managing to make it better. This is a case of people coming to us, some of whom may have these issues, but actually the percentage weight gain whilst patients are with us is of remarkable concern. So this is an issue that by coming to our environment, for many patients we cause the problems, and you rightly listed some of the issues. It's not all medication. Even people who are not on medication will put on weight with us. It's to do, I think, largely with lack of activity. And here I'm not just talking about the gym, I'm just talking about all of the day-to-day activities for us all to get up and get here in the first place is constantly using energy. It's much reduced when you're in an environment like the State Hospital. And also, we have to be honest, one of the pleasures in life when you are in a place like the State Hospital is going to be what you eat. And you have a choice there. So we've had the outcomes. We can see that our plan, which was very well implemented by the Supporting Healthy Choices group, there are bits of that still ongoing. There are bits we can do more with, like the health and wellbeing plan. But actually at the moment we've got a workshop planned for mid-January to rethink our ideas. The majority of our patients have capacity to choose. But we're in a difficult position of what do you do when somebody has a health and wellbeing plan, has signed it off, but continuously will go to the shop and buy, what did we reckon? One of our bags could hold 8,000 calories worth. Now that's almost 4 days worth of food. We work with relatives. You know, what do you do when you visit somebody? It's a kindness. You tend to bring something. Our relatives are coming a distance. They can come with bags of goods. It is meant as a kindness, but it contributes to the problem. So now we're in a position of, particularly the group whose BMI is very high, over 38, morbidly obese. Can we challenge this? Can we do more with this cohort? That's where we're looking at more radical ideas there.
So would the radical ideas include things like Fitbits or other technology to, you know, support that? Because we're in the process of doing a social prescribing inquiry as well, and that looks at how do you incentivise, how do you help people who might be constrained by the environment they're in to enable them to then become more physically active?
Absolutely. Now, we have some security constraints about devices that can communicate out into the ether, but what we did do was the machines that count your steps. So we brought those in for patients. We are open to all ideas. I should say we also have slim and trim groups, healthy weight groups. All of these ideas we're open to. The bottom line will be, though, and we really do push activity, your daily mile, or our occupational therapists have a 400 yards campaign, all sorts of things. Probably about 80% of it is in what you consume, and about 20% of it is in exercise. Now, if you're exercising, you probably feel better, so that the control over the consumption is easier as well. But there's something about the triggers and the mechanisms that surround the individuals we look after as to how we help there, so that eating is not such a constant issue.
Mark Richards.
Yes, just to build on what Professor Thompson said, I mean, there's no doubt that the dietary element of individuals' lives in the State Hospital is a significant factor. But there are rights-based challenges around that. We talked earlier in this hearing about rights-based practice, and there is a question about justifiable infringement of an individual's rights as it relates to their dietary intake. But we do have a huge challenge around diet. With reference to physical activity, we have made some changes in the past 12 months or so. We have made more exercise equipment available at ward level, which we've seen have a positive impact. And we've got a couple of projects running just now as part of our State Hospital Improvement Month, TSH 3030, which are focused on physical activity. One of our wards is focused on walking, and I think I've done several hundred miles in the past month as a patient group, so we'll see what we can learn from that and build that out. And as Professor Thompson's mentioned already, work around through our AHP group, through their 400-yard campaign to try and ensure that everyone's walking at least 400 yards per day. So there are activities that are going on, but it is exceptionally challenging within that environment to address it.
Lindsay, you said that people, before they even come into the state hospital, might be overweight already. And is that related to the fact that they're on medications that might cause them to have an increased appetite? Or one of the articles I'm reading here, it's the Psychopharmacological magazine, March 17, says that people crave more calories and often report craving sweet and fatty food. So is that a significant issue if they're coming in already because they have been prescribed medication that might put them at a higher risk of gaining weight in the first place?
So I think actually most of the damage occurs within our environment. We can see that some patients who have been elsewhere may come in that category, but we can see within several months that patients' body weight has increased markedly. You're totally correct about some of the medications. Some more than others will cause cravings for food, particularly sweet food. So that is part of it, but it's only one part of the equation. The whole constricted environment is another part as well.
And we've talked a little bit about, sorry, Convener, about infringement on rights. So if there is a family member that's coming with 2 bags of groceries, you can't intercept that and remove it, or because that would be difficult to then say, I'm sorry, you can't give these foods that might not be the most healthy to your family member.
So we do have some restrictions from a security perspective and also a food safety perspective as to foods that would require refrigerated and so on. I think there are limitations in the number of items that can come through security, and that's just for reasons of efficiency and being able to get everybody to their visits, and how you get that stuff checked and through. But no, the bottom line is if you're determined to come with sweeties or biscuits, then we have no powers to stop that.
Very much. Brian.
Thank you, Gavina. A bit of a topic of mine. I think there's a recognition, obviously, that physical activity and nutrition can have such a positive impact on mental health. I was looking at 90 minutes. This thing that's been quoted in our notes about 90 minutes of physical activity, which is going to burn, 500 to 1,000 calories against a weekly, intake of 17,500, which is what's recommended, let alone over and above what you're describing there. So 90 minutes is not enough physical activity to have any kind of reasonable impact on levels of obesity. I think the question I would have is, what restrictions, how are you restricted in terms of what you can offer? What can be done to improve that? And are the staff enabled and understand the impact of physical activity as a resource to tackle the issues that your patients have?
So I think staff are very clear on the importance of this. We have some terrific facilities up in the Sky Centre, which is our major activity centre in terms of a gym, and sports staff who are very committed to the task, and as well as the gym, there's the games hall, and there's all sorts of sporting activities, football, volleyball, and so on. Within each of the hubs, which comprises of 3 wards, there is also a small gym, but we've actually found moving that equipment into the ward areas, it's more used. So there is a commitment to that. The 90 minutes is clearly not adequate, and we don't meet it. I think the aim is for 60% of our patients, and I think we're at something like 53% of our patients. But you can see at a glance that it should be more than that. We have tremendous variation. About 70 of our patients have what we call grounds access. So during daylight hours, obviously a little bit more restricted at this time of the year, but during the summer months, goes on into the evening, they can go out and walk, and we have extensive grounds. Indeed, we even have the potential for people to run if they so wished, and they wear the running vest within our grounds. So some of my patients, for example, one of the good things that the Sporting Healthy Choices group brought in was a weekly report on how many hours your patient exercised and at what level. So I can get a report for some of mine which might say 6.5 hours. 3.5 hours of that might be walking, plus 1.5 hours at a high intensity. But what we have is very great variation in patients, which of course also reflects their mental health. Are you able to get out and about and do that? But I would agree with your comments. This is the big challenge for us. How do we work towards increasing those levels of activity, getting everybody out? One of the things the group did was reduce very significantly the length of time it took from when you were admitted to getting up for your sports induction. And they took about 60 days off that. But to my eyes, we should be looking to shorten that still further. So as soon as your health is sufficient that you're safe enough to be able to move into that environment, we should be getting you up there to start on a whole fitness and activity programme.
So do you actively encourage, or are you looking to actively encourage patients to be more active and to be cognizant of their nutrition?
Yes, we absolutely do. One other important aspect of that is we have had a more recent focus on vocational role development for our patient group within the hospital, and we are starting to train, albeit a small number, but important nevertheless, a cohort of sports leaders. So our patients are developing a skill set around sports leadership within the state hospital, and from that we are starting to deliver more of a co-produced approach to activity within the hospital as well. Early days of that, but I'm hopeful that we'll see benefits of that through time.
Okay.
Can I ask Robin McNaught to comment on the savings plans that the State Hospital has? I know that there are intentions to have some further saving going forward, and I wonder if you would like to comment on where these savings might be found.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The savings plans we work on are worked through individual meetings with each of the directors and going across all the directorates, but on an individual budgetary basis to identify what can be achieved in those areas. We've had a challenging savings target over the last few years, but we have achieved it in each year. The strong focus for us in recent years has been to redress the balance away from non-recurring to recurring to enable a more sustainable position going forward. The pressure we're under with that is that when we actually compare ourselves to other boards, particularly territorial boards, we have the highest proportion of staff costs as a percentage of our total costs, which currently is at just under 85%. When we compare that to some of the other national or special boards, they tend to be around between 60 and 70%, the territorials between 30 and 40. So when we are trying to look at longer term sustainable savings plans, we're very restricted in the sense that there's only about 15% of our staff, of our non-staff costs, where we can actually work for future economies. So one of the factors going forward, while the clinical model review, there was an extensive appraisal of potential benefits and the desired benefits out of the new clinical model. The financial element of that did not kick in until the various options of the clinical model had been evaluated, because we didn't want the focus of the new clinical model to be financial. But obviously, once the options were identified, they had to then be evaluated to assess their affordability, to make sure that the model that was taken forward was within our resources. And when that was then being looked at, which was again an extensive appraisal led by Mark Richards for obviously from the nursing cost perspective, we are then looking at the potential for that model when it is introduced in April 2020 to provide us with some savings on the staffing side and the structure of the both nursing and the related services, which we'll be able to bring into our recurring balance. So it is I won't say a constant exercise, but it's the work on savings is something that takes place throughout the year. We assess at the beginning of the year, and we get estimates from each of the directorates as to what can be achieved and what they're planning to achieve. What tends to happen is we then have a level, as you'll have seen from our financial reports, of savings that are unidentified at the start of the year, which we then have to work through in the year. And quite often these are addressed by vacancy management when we do make a level of, I know the phrase perhaps sounds slightly inconsistent, of recurring, non-recurring savings, because we do know that each year there will be an element of non-recurring savings come from vacancy management. But when we combine that with we obviously have a slight additional pressure of making savings from the National Board's collaborative exercise, then it does give us a challenging position, but it is one that we have improved in the last 2 years, and I think we would expect to make continued improvements into 2020-21.
You're confident in the current year that the unidentified savings that were still around a few months ago will be identified and delivered in the course of the financial year?
Yes, we are. For 2019-20, we are confident that we will achieve these.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, David Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. Could I raise the issue of media reports? You'll be aware that your annual report talked about significant negative press in 2018, particularly around the Daily Record. I had the opportunity to review the Daily Record comments, and I'll quote this because it's not my words, but they talk about whistleblowers say patients at Carstairs are able to hold parties with smuggled in drugs. The second reference was, and I'm quoting this, a wife killer was out with escorts enjoying a shot and trip in Glasgow, and finally a violent patient was goaded into attacking a vulnerable man. So 2018 was particularly negative. Could you explain, was there any particular factors around this? I don't obviously know the accuracy of these three examples I've given, but was there any particular factors that in 2018 that led to such negative contributions from the press, particularly the Daily Record?
One of the points that I would like to ensure comes across is the strength of partnership working. But you're quite right, during a particular period, during 2018-19, we went through a horrible time with negative press. In terms of the factors behind that, it's always quite difficult to get exactly what caused this. I suspect that we were trying to introduce some new ways of working. This was pre the new clinical model work, which some members of staff were unhappy with. And historically at the State Hospital, the tabloids have always been willing recipients of snippets, some of which tend to be true and some of which tend to be false. For example, in the particular issues that you talk about, I think the parties referred to at the time were totally false. I think the issue about the shopping trip was exactly true. But when patients are ready to go from high secure to medium secure, we go through a preparatory phase and take them out into the community. Now, in that particular case, we always are very guarded about where someone is going. I think we have got to acknowledge that there must have been some inside information transmitted to the paper. So when our people took a particular patient to a particular venue, the Daily Record was there with photographers, which I believe to be absolutely appalling practice. But however, it happened. And when you get into a downward cycle in negative media, and there's many people could answer this better than me right now, but when you get into that downward cycle, it's difficult to break out of it. We have managed to break out of it because it's been very noticeable since that period, round about last autumn. There has been virtually no negative press comments. And I suspect that is probably down to a marked increase in staff engagement. So the lesson, I guess, we have to learn from that is staff engagement should always be right up there. And perhaps we have to acknowledge we weren't paying enough attention to that.
Thanks. I think through you, Kavita, I think that's a very honest and open contribution. You also mentioned earlier that your board meetings are going to be held out with Carstairs. That would seem to be sensible, and obviously you'll be engaging with the press at these venues. Do you have press professionals within your organisation?
We have a PR officer. She's excellent. The main thrust of her efforts are based at internal communication, but obviously she handles our numerous press inquiries that we get. I mean, within the last fortnight, we've probably been mentioned in the press 3 or 4 times simply because one of our patients has, one patient or another has had some national profile because of court appearances, etc. As I said in my opening remarks, we believe the right approach is to be much more proactive in our communications. We think there's a lot of interesting stuff that we do, particularly around research, etc. And we think there is an appetite out there, probably not the tabloid newspapers, I have to say, but we think there's an appetite out there from medical journalists and broadsheets who would welcome more comment from us. And that's the way we intend to get down. And Carrie, you may want to say that something in addition to that.
So, absolutely. In relation to those breaches that you mentioned specifically, I'll maybe come on to first. And we did receive, well, we reported ourselves obviously the Information Commission officers as well as Police Scotland. And we did receive back just that the Information Commissioner's office was satisfied that there should be no action taken against us as long as we'd implemented our own recommendations following up on that. I think 2 things. If you look back, there's an old ring binder of media information. In fact, there's about 3 or 4 which go back through the history of the state hospital, probably over the last 10 or 15 years. I would struggle out of all that information to find anything positive that's actually been published in relation to the state hospital. In fact, it refers, to outdated terms and archaic, I think, understanding of a modern mental health organisation. The difficulty, as I mentioned earlier on, is how you actually promote the work of the state hospital in a way that is not seen to be challenging for people who have victim or other issues associated with the patient cohort that is in there. And one of the suggestions that I brought forward through the private session of the board is that we actually develop either some media relations or some media sponsors that will work with us in trying to work out a better way to communicate on the work that the hospital does, to promote that work, but at the same time recognise that it is still a very publicly sensitive area. And also, of course, there's the general internal stuff again around is reminding staff of confidentiality. We all have to sign these documents when we come into post, and also the rules against patient dignity and respect.
So you can read it. Obviously, I realise you're a kind of unique situation, but certainly when we've spoken to territorial boards, one of the key factors is the whole regionalisation. In other words, talking to neighbouring boards about best practice. Is there any aspects of that you can learn from other boards about how they deal with the media and how they deal with, obviously, internal communication? And that's, I think it's positive that there's been a development with your own staff. But is there anything that you have learned?
If I may, so my previous employment was Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and one of the areas in my portfolio was the Beatson West of Scotland Cancer Centre. And some of you will be aware there was a very positive documentary series around about the work of the Beatson, promoting the work of the Beatson, and actually to try and do it in an empowered way that would remove some of the fear and stigma of the Beatson. So I still had a number of contacts in relation to the production company, but also in relation to the media officers that were involved and guided us through that process at the time. So the work that I've been referring to would involve some of the media relations officers around about how we handle our public profile going forward, but also trying to link into aspects of the developing and emerging mental health strategy for Scotland, so that we can be seen to be apace with that, but also we can again promote in a positive way where it's palatable the work that the hospital does. So that's certainly again work that we've presented through the private session of the board to take forward to try to improve that whole perception of what we do in the State Hospital.
Okay,
Thank you. And can I thank the witnesses for your evidence today? It's been much appreciated. There are one or two questions I think we'll probably follow up from that with you, and therefore you'll hear from us shortly. But if there's anything else that you feel you haven't had the opportunity to put in the record today that we should know, then feel free to offer that to us as well. Gary Jenkins.
Yeah. There was one final point that we wanted to make, and just sometimes it's very difficult if you've not visited the State Hospital to understand the work and how the whole environment operates. So again, we would just extend, if anybody wanted to visit the hospital, we'd be happy to accommodate that.
That's much appreciated. Thank you very much. We will now move into private session.